as the citizens of Italy were facing ballooning inflation and potential starvation as a consequence of the 50% yield tax levied on farmers by a second triumvirate focused only on funding their war against the liberators. Marcus Antonius was stepping aboard a luxurious pleasure barge in Tarsus and sitting down to a decadent feast. For several nights, Antonius feasted at the table of Egypt's Queen Cleopatra, devouring the most expensive delicacies her chefs could create. Shrimp, scallops, oysters, eggs, roasted peacock, capons, pheasant, lamb, and crocodile were washed down with amphorae of the most expensive Chian wines available. Aboard a pleasure barge plated in gold, with oars fashioned from silver, walls of polished citrus wood, and sails dyed such a rich Tyrian purple that Egypt must surely have suffered a snail deficit, Marcus Antonius basked in the wealth on display, Cleopatra's wealth he desperately desired. In order to invade and punish Parthias, King Orodes II for supporting Brutus and Cassius, Antonius needed funds. However, following the battles of Philippi, Rome's eastern provinces were as bankrupt as the rest of the empire, except for Egypt, where there was sufficient gold to fund all the ambitions of Marcus Antonius, gold which a queen did not hesitate to flaunt. Pliny the Elder tells us that after being wined and dined by Cleopatra for several days, the triumvir asked her, in surrendered tones, how she could possibly serve up a more lavish outlay. Cleopatra then wagered that she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single entertainment. Disbelieving her, Antonius accepted the wager, whereby she instructed him to return again the following evening for another banquet aboard her sumptuous barge. The next night, as Antonius reclined alongside the queen, enjoying yet more culinary delights, Cleopatra's servants placed a single cup of vinegar on the table before her. Unclipping a pearl fastened to her ear, Cleopatra dropped it into the cup of vinegar, and then proceeded to eat her dinner. When the pearl, valued at 10 million sesterces, had fully dissolved in the vinegar, Egypt's queen drank the contents of the cup, and won her wager with Marcus Antonius. She then offered him the pearl attached to her other ear, along with a cup of vinegar, but Antonius declined, declaring her the victor. Although this event is still mired in speculation, Pliny's relaying of it clearly demonstrates that it was not her feminine wiles alone which Cleopatra sought to use to seduce Marcus Antonius, but the allure of her immeasurable wealth. Not only was it necessary that Marcus Antonius absolve her of the accusation that she had aided Brutus and Cassius, but she needed him in an official capacity as well. Cleopatra's younger sister, Arsinoe, having been proclaimed queen during Egypt's civil war, had been found guilty by Cleopatra of conspiring against her throne and sentenced to death in Alexandria. But, being influenced by the outcry for mercy from the crowd as Arsinoe had walked the streets of Rome during Caesar's triumph, the dictator had spared her, exiling Arsinoe to the Artemisium in nearby Ephesus, where she continued to be a threat to Cleopatra's rule. But another also threatened her hold on power. The Arcadians were protecting a young man claiming to be her first husband and brother, Ptolemy XIII, alleged to have drowned in the aftermath of Caesar's victory at the Battle of the Nile River. The young king's body was not recovered. Whether Ptolemy XIII survived the Battle of the Nile and was spirited away by his allies, or whether the Arcadians were harboring an impostor, the threat to Cleopatra was the same. Egypt was full of people who resented her congenial relationship with Rome, and who would eagerly rally around Ptolemy XIII or around Arsinoe, if overthrowing Cleopatra as their ruler might mean independence from Rome. Furthermore, Cleopatra's political reputation had been tarnished by one of her ministers. The island of Cyprus, which had belonged to her uncle, King Ptolemy of Cyprus, before being annexed by Rome, had been repossessed by Cleopatra through Caesar's agency. The viceroy Cleopatra put in charge of Cyprus, a minister by the name of Serapion, had committed a fleet of ships to Cassius, supposedly without Cleopatra's permission, but Cleopatra claimed to have personally transferred a fleet to Greece in support of the triumvirs. Because of Serapion, Cleopatra now found herself accused of playing both ends against the middle. From Cleopatra's perspective, Arsinoe, Ptolemy and Serapion all had to be removed, and Marcus Antonius had the authority to bring it about. After being fully indulged as Cleopatra's guest on her pleasure barge, Marcus Antonius then extended an invitation to the Queen of Egypt to dine with him in a less extravagant atmosphere among his men. Perhaps, setting aside the pleasurable distractions, Antonius could get down to business and advance his agenda, sowing the accusations laid against Cleopatra to reap his financial reward. However, Cleopatra banqueted as enthusiastically as if Marcus Antonius had just introduced her to some exotic and hitherto unseen curiosity, unmoved by dining on soldiers' fare from plates and goblets that were not gleaming gold and jewel-encrusted, and failing to be confronted by his down-to-business attitude. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra's beauty was not altogether incomparable. Neither was her beauty such as to leave those who saw her thunderstruck. But to be in the presence of Cleopatra, with her irresistible charm, and to hear her speak, her voice smooth, thoughtful, intelligent, and laced with honey, was at once to fall under the spell of a woman whose particular force of character pervaded her every word and action. With magnetic grace, Cleopatra made the case to Marcus Antonius that she had sent her legions, not to Cassius, but to Publius Cornelius Dolabella, who was a Caesarian and the legally appointed governor of Syria at the time. The fleet she had ordered to set sail for Greece was to be for Antonius's personal use in his war against Brutus and Cassius. In answer to the accusation that she had simultaneously ordered Serapion, the viceroy on Cyprus, to dispatch a fleet to Cassius as a surety against the possibility the liberators might win the war, Cleopatra more than likely concocted an alibi accusing Serapion of being influenced by her sister Arsinoe, living in sanctuary in nearby Ephesus. Unable to twist the accusations against Cleopatra into a winning argument and wrest the wealth of Egypt from her hands as she convincingly presented her defense, Marcus Antonius likely changed tactics. Without Egypt's gold, Antonius could not step into Caesar's sandals and mirror the dictator's conquest of Gaul by bringing the whole of Parthia to heel, making it part of Rome's mighty domain. Nor could he take Egypt's wealth by force through invasion. To march legions against Egypt would also require money that Antonius did not have, and Cleopatra knew it. Egypt might eventually fall in a war against Rome, albeit not as quickly nor as cheaply as Antonius would wish. But the Queen of Egypt had voyaged to Tarsus in style, the wealth of Egypt on full display. That she had bedecked herself as Venus, the Greek version of Isis, to complement his identification with Dionysus, the Egyptian Osiris, was no accident. In Rome's Forum Romanum, a statue of Cleopatra Isis holding her son Ptolemy Horus stood alongside the statue of Venus Genetrix in the temple built by Caesar, which honored the divine mother of the Julii. The goddess Venus was mother to Aeneas, the founder of Caesar's clan, and Egypt's Venus had given birth to Ptolemy Caesar. In Rome, Gaius Octavius had changed his name to reflect his manufactured relationship to the now divine Caesar. But it was Cleopatra who was mother to Caesar's only real son. And by supporting Cleopatra and her son's interests in Rome, Antonius might hope to rid himself of that upstart, Caesar Divi Filius. For Marcus Antonius, it was time to seriously consider Cleopatra as a partner in his labors. If the triumvir gave the queen what she wanted, then she might give him what he wanted. What Cleopatra wanted was her throne, uncontested. And in the pursuit of her ambitions, Cleopatra had proven herself as ruthless as any Caesar, Antonius, or Octavius. Even her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, after doing everything that was commanded of him, had been sacrificed on the altar of Cleopatra's ambition. The lad had for 5 months been held hostage by Caesar, who then forced him to marry his sister. But the young Ptolemy knew full well that it was his sister, Cleopatra, who alone would rule in Egypt. That his sister was now the mother of Caesar's son also meant the Ptolemaic line was being replaced. Caesar had planted the seeds of his own dynasty within Egypt's royal family. Born into a murderous family where fathers strangled their daughters, Ptolemy had managed to survive, but only as long as Caesar held the reins. Soon after the dictator's assassination, the 15-year-old king of Egypt died under mysterious circumstances. But, if such sacrifices were necessary to please the goddess Cleopatra Isis, Marcus Antonius was ready to prove himself worthy. In Ephesus, a squad of legionaries marched into the great temple dedicated to Artemis. After seizing the eunuch priest, Megabyzus, and taking him into their custody, the soldiers searched the premises until they found their intended, kicking and screaming for someone, anyone, to please help her. The one-time queen of Egypt, and now exiled and lowly priestess of Artemis, was brutally dragged from the protective walls of her holy sanctuary. On the temple steps of the Artemision, Arsinoe IV was murdered in cold blood, at the behest of the triumvir Marcus Antonius.